"I'm tired of living without a man," said girl, and rancher got her pregnant. The small, quiet town where she lived was nestled between rolling hills and vast stretches of farmland. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, and the pace of life moved slowly. The sun rose early, casting long shadows over the fields, and the air was filled with the scent of fresh earth and hay. For the girl, this was home. It was where she had grown up, where she had learned the hard work of farming, and where she had learned to be self-reliant. Her name was Clara. She was in her late 20s, a tall, strong woman with eyes that seemed to hold a quiet sadness. She had been raised by her father after her mother passed away when Clara was just a child. Her father had been a tough, no-nonsense man who believed in hard work and discipline. He never showed much emotion, but he had taught Clara everything she needed to know about running a farm. From an early age, she had learned how to feed the animals, mend the fences, and harvest the crops. Every day she worked alongside her father, putting in long hours, sometimes until the sun had already set. Clara had never really minded the work. She had been taught that it was simply a part of life. It gave her a sense of purpose. But, as she grew older, something began to stir deep inside her. While she was strong, independent, and capable, she couldn't ignore the emptiness she sometimes felt in her heart. She watched as couples in the town walked hand in hand down the streets, and she saw the families at church on Sundays, with the children running around and laughing. Clara longed for a life like that, a life that was filled with companionship and love. She never had many friends. Living on a farm, isolated from the rest of the town, made it difficult to form close relationships. Clara's life was full of work, and she didn't have time to go out and meet new people. Most of the townspeople knew her only as the quiet girl who worked hard on the farm. She wasn't sure if anyone even really knew her. When she tried to talk to people, she often felt like they didn't understand her. She was too different, too independent, or maybe just too lonely. Despite all the work she did on the farm, Clara couldn't escape the ache in her chest. It was the ache of being alone. She had never been in a serious relationship, and the few flings she had in the past had never amounted to anything. She had never met anyone who seemed to understand her, someone who could share her life and her dreams. And as the years passed, the ache grew stronger, until it became something she couldn't ignore anymore. One evening after finishing the chores, Clara sat on the porch of the farmhouse, staring out at the fields. The sun was setting, casting a golden light over the land. She had been working all day, but now, in the quiet of the evening, she felt the weight of the world on her shoulders. She was tired, not just physically, but emotionally. She was tired of doing everything on her own. She was tired of carrying the heavy burden of loneliness that she had tried to ignore for so long. With a sigh, Clara wrapped her arms around her knees and pulled them close to her chest. She closed her eyes and let the warm breeze blow through her hair. For a moment she allowed herself to feel the emptiness she had been avoiding. It was like a heavy stone inside her pressing down on her heart. She had never felt this way before. The ache of loneliness had always been there, lurking in the background, but now it was impossible to ignore. Her mind drifted back to the town and the people she had seen. She remembered the young couples at the market, laughing together, sharing stories and dreams. She thought of the families she had seen at church, their children sitting on their laps or running through the aisles. For a brief moment she let herself imagine what it would be like to have someone to share her life with, to have a family of her own. She imagined waking up next to someone every morning, having someone to talk to laugh with, and to share the ups and downs of life. But that wasn't her reality. She was alone, and the more she thought about it, the more she realized how much she wanted things to be different. She was tired of living without a man, tired of feeling like something was missing in her life. She had been strong for so long, but now she just wanted someone to be there for her, someone who would make her feel like she mattered. The thought of it hit her like a wave, overwhelming and sudden. She didn't know where it came from or why it was so strong, but the feeling of longing for companionship was undeniable. "I'm tired of living without a man," she whispered softly to herself, as if saying the words out loud would somehow make them more real. The words felt strange on her lips, but they also felt true. She had never admitted it to anyone, not even to herself, but now There was no escaping it. She wanted more from life than just work and solitude. She wanted love, affection, and companionship. She sat there in silence for a long time, her thoughts swirling around her. The wind picked up, rustling the trees in the distance, and the sky turned from gold to a deep shade of blue. Clara wiped a tear from her cheek, a tear she hadn't even realized had fallen. It wasn't just a tear of sadness. It was a tear of realization. She had spent so many years focusing on her work, trying to fill the emptiness with productivity, but now she understood that she couldn't fill the void with work alone. She needed someone to share her life with, someone who would see her for who she truly was. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. She wasn't sure what to do with it or where to go from here, but it was clear that her life had reached a turning point. She couldn't keep going the way she had been. Something had to change. She had to make a choice. But that night, Clara didn't have the answers. She didn't know how to fill the emptiness inside her. She only knew that the ache of loneliness was something she couldn't ignore anymore. She needed a change, but what that change would look like, she wasn't sure. As the night drew on, Clara stood up from the porch, dusting off her jeans. She walked inside the farmhouse, her heart heavy but determined. Tomorrow would be a new day. Tomorrow, maybe things would be different. But for now, she had to rest. The work would still be there in the morning. The loneliness, too. But maybe, just maybe, there was a way out of it. Clara didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to hope. It had been a few weeks since Clara had first sat on the porch and admitted to herself how lonely she felt. She hadn't shared those thoughts with anyone, not even her father, who had always been the strong, silent type. Clara had never known anything different. She had always been taught to work hard and keep her emotions in check. But now, the ache of loneliness had become something she could no longer ignore. She wanted more, and she knew it. The opportunity to change her life arrived in an unexpected way. One crisp autumn afternoon, Clara was asked to help deliver some fresh produce to a neighboring farm. The rancher who owned the property was known for his cattle and his solitary way of life. His name was James Lawson, and while Clara had heard of him, she had never really spoken to him. James was much older than her, around 10 years older, and he was known for being a quiet man who kept to himself. His ranch was on the outskirts of town, far enough that not many people ever bothered him unless they needed something. Clara had never expected to meet him personally, but that afternoon when she pulled up to his property, she found herself face to face with him. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with graying hair and weathered skin from years of working under the sun. His eyes, though, were soft, with a quiet warmth that Clara hadn't expected. At first, the meeting was brief and professional. Clara handed over the crates of vegetables and James paid her in cash, nodding his thanks. There was no small talk, just the usual exchange. But as she turned to leave, Clara felt a sudden, unexplainable pull. She hesitated for a moment before speaking. "Thank you for buying the produce," she said softly. Her voice sounded strange in the quiet of the ranch, like she hadn't spoken to anyone in far too long.
"I hope everything's going well here."
James paused, looking up from the cash he was counting. His expression softened, and he gave her a small smile. "Things are good," he said, his voice deep but kind. "Quiet. You don't come out this way often, do you?" Clara shook her head. "No, not really. Just delivering the goods for my father." There was a brief silence between them, and Clara felt awkward. She had never been good at small talk, especially with someone she didn't know. But James didn't seem uncomfortable. In fact, he seemed as though he was used to long silences. Finally, he spoke again. "Your father's a hard man. He's a good worker." Clara smiled faintly. "Yes, he is. I'm sure he raised you to be the same," James said, glancing over at her. Clara nodded again. He did. The conversation came to an end quickly, and Clara made her way back to her truck. As she drove away, she couldn't help but think about James. There was something about him that intrigued her. He wasn't like the other men in town, the ones who always seemed to be chasing something, either money, fame, or attention. James was different. He didn't seem to need anyone, and yet there was a calmness about him that made Clara wonder if he was hiding something. Maybe he had loneliness in his heart, too. Maybe, like her, he just didn't show it. Over the next few days, Clara found herself thinking about James more than she expected. She wondered what his life was like, how he spent his days, and if he ever got lonely. She didn't know much about him, but there was something magnetic about the way he carried himself. His quiet strength, his grounded nature, it was something that Clara admired, but also something that made her feel even more isolated. She wondered if someone like him could ever be interested in someone like her. As the weeks passed, their paths crossed again. This time, it was a simple chance meeting at the general store. Clara was picking up supplies for her father when she saw James standing by the counter, looking over a few items. He didn't notice her at first, so she took a moment to observe him. He was still the same. A man of few words, with a rugged, almost mysterious air about him. This time, Clara didn't want to let the moment pass. She had already been thinking about him so much, and something inside her pushed her to take action. She walked up to him, her heart pounding slightly. "Hello," she said, feeling a little nervous. James turned around, his expression unreadable at first. Then his eyes softened when he saw her. "Hello, Clara," he said, his voice low but familiar. "It's good to see you again." Clara smiled, a little more comfortable this time. "You too," she replied. "I didn't expect to see you here. Are you stocking up for the winter?" He nodded. "Just getting the basics." It's that time of year. They both stood there for a moment, not knowing exactly what to say next. The silence between them was less awkward now. Clara was starting to feel more at ease around him, and James seemed to be more relaxed too. Finally, she spoke up. I heard you had a pretty big cattle herd. How's it going?" James chuckled softly. "Well, it's never easy. But it's going well enough."
Clara nodded.
She didn't know much about ranching, but she could tell he wasn't one to brag. He was humble, unlike most people she'd met. That quality in him was something she found refreshing. After a few more moments of casual conversation, James turned to her and said, I don't usually get many visitors out my way. If you ever want to stop by, feel free. It's always nice to talk to someone." Clara blinked, surprised by the invitation. She wasn't sure what to say, but the words came out before she could stop them. "I'd like that," she said, almost without thinking. James smiled again, a little more warmly this time. "Well, take care, Clara. I'll see you around." As she watched him leave the store, Clara's mind raced. She hadn't expected that. It was a small thing, a simple invitation, but it meant more to her than she could explain. Maybe it was just the fact that he had noticed her, or maybe it was the idea that he was willing to open up to her, even if only a little. Over the next few days, Clara couldn't stop thinking about James. Her thoughts kept drifting back to that simple moment in the store, and the more she thought about it, the more she realized that she wanted to spend more time with him. She wanted to learn about his life, hear his stories, and maybe, just maybe, feel less alone. The next week, Clara finally made up her mind. She drove to James's ranch, the familiar dirt road leading her towards something she wasn't entirely sure of. Her heart was racing, but she knew it was time to take a chance. She wanted to know more about James, and she wanted to see where this connection could lead. When she arrived at his ranch, she found him outside tending to his cattle. He looked up when he heard her truck, and his face softened when he saw her. "I didn't expect you to actually come," he said, surprised but not unwelcoming. Clara smiled nervously. "I thought I'd take you up on that offer." "You said I could stop by." James nodded, motioning for her to come closer.
Glad you did.
I could use the company, and so their journey began.
What started as a simple visit soon turned into something deeper. The more Clara got to know James, the more she found herself drawn to him. There was something about his quiet strength, his unspoken kindness, that made her feel safe in a way she hadn't felt in years. Clara found herself spending more and more time with James. What had started as a casual visit soon turned into something she looked forward to every day. The bond between them deepened naturally, as if it was always meant to happen. She began to help him with tasks around the ranch, learning about the animals and the land. She had never been so fascinated by something she had once considered simple and routine. The way James moved with the animals, the ease with which he tended to the land, it was all so natural to him. It was clear he had lived this life for many years, and watching him work made Clara feel a sense of peace she had never known before. James, too, seemed to enjoy her company. He never rushed their conversations, allowing them to unfold slowly, as if he was savoring every moment. He was kind and patient, answering her questions without hesitation, but he didn't press her for personal details. There was something unspoken between them, a comfort in the silence they shared, as if the mere presence of the other was enough. For Clara, these moments with James were like a balm for the loneliness that had plagued her for years. There was no pressure, no expectations, just two people finding solace in each other's company. She had always believed that love had to be something grand, something full of excitement and passion, but now she was learning that it could be quiet, calm, and steady. And that, in its own way, was more than enough. One evening as the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Clara sat on the porch of James's ranch house. She watched as James worked in the fields, his figure silhouetted against the fading light. He had asked her to stay for dinner that night, something he didn't usually do, and Clara was eager to share a meal with him. There was a warmth to the house, a feeling of home that Clara hadn't realized she'd been craving until now. She felt comfortable here, at ease with herself and with him. After a while, James joined her on the porch, carrying 2 plates of food. They sat together, eating in the quiet of the evening. The only sound was the occasional chirp of a cricket or the rustle of leaves in the wind. "You know," James said, breaking the silence, "I never thought I'd enjoy having company around."
Clara smiled, glancing at him. "I never thought I'd be the one keeping you company," she said softly, surprised at her own words.
James looked at her for a moment, his eyes thoughtful. "I'm glad you're here, Clara. I don't know if I've ever really let someone in, not like this." Clara felt a warmth spread through her chest. She had always been a quiet person, someone who kept to herself, but there was something about James that made her feel safe enough to open up. She had never been good at showing her vulnerability, but with him, it felt natural. "I'm glad too," she said, her voice barely above a whisper.
I've never felt like this before.
There was a long pause, and for a moment they simply sat there, each lost in their own thoughts. Clara wondered if James felt the same way she did. She had never been one to rush things, but this feeling was different. It wasn't just about companionship. It was deeper than that. She could feel it in the way her heart raced whenever he looked at her, in the way her stomach fluttered when he smiled. It was the kind of feeling she had only heard about in stories, the kind of feeling she had always longed for but never expected to find. James seemed to sense her unease, and he reached over, placing a hand on hers. His touch was warm and reassuring, and Clara felt a wave of calm wash over her. For the first time in years, she didn't feel the need to guard her emotions. She let herself relax into the moment, knowing that she was with someone who genuinely cared for her. "I never thought I'd find someone like you," James said quietly, his voice filled with sincerity. Clara's heart skipped a beat at his words. She didn't know what to say. She had always been afraid of getting too close to people, afraid of letting them see the parts of her that were fragile and uncertain. But with James it felt different. She felt like she could trust him, like he understood her in a way that no one else ever had. "You're not like anyone I've ever met," Clara said, her voice soft but steady. "I've never felt so comfortable." James smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "I know what you mean. I've never felt this at peace with anyone before." For a moment the world seemed to disappear. It was just the two of them, sitting on the porch, enjoying the simplicity of the moment. Clara couldn't remember the last time she had felt so content, so sure of herself. With James, she didn't have to pretend to be anything she wasn't. He accepted her for who she was, flaws and all. As the evening wore on, they finished their dinner and sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars begin to appear in the sky. Clara leaned back in her chair, letting the cool night air wash over her. She felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. It was as if the weight of the world had been lifted from her shoulders, replaced by the calm presence of someone who truly cared. Over the next few weeks, Clara and James's connection deepened even more. They spent more time together, and their conversations grew more personal. James shared stories from his past, tales of his childhood, his family, and the struggles he had faced to get where he was today. Clara listened intently, her heart growing fonder of him with each passing day. She learned about the hardships he had endured, how he had lost his parents at a young age and had been forced to build his life from the ground up. He wasn't just the quiet rancher anymore. He was someone who had fought for everything he had. In turn, Clara began to open up more about herself. She shared memories of her father, of the hard work that had shaped her into the woman she was today. She told James about her mother, who had passed away when Clara was just a little girl. It was a painful subject for her, but with James it felt easier to talk about. She didn't have to hide her grief. He listened without judgment, offering comfort in the simplest ways, a gentle touch on her shoulder, a reassuring smile. One evening as they walked through the fields together, Clara felt a surge of emotion. The connection between them had grown stronger than she had ever anticipated, and for the first time in her life, she felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. It was as if the universe had finally brought them together, and she couldn't deny the feeling she had for him any longer. "I'm glad I met you, James," Clara said softly, her voice filled with sincerity. James stopped walking and turned to face her, his expression warm and thoughtful. "I'm glad you came into my life, Clara." There was a moment of silence between them, and then Clara found herself taking a step closer to him. She could feel the heat of his body radiating toward hers, and her heart began to race. She wasn't sure what would happen next, but in that moment, it didn't matter. She had found someone who cared for her, someone who saw her for who she truly was, and that was enough. James reached out and gently cupped her face in his hands, his touch tender and careful. His eyes locked with hers, and Clara could see the depth of emotion in them. There was no rush, no pressure. It was just the two of them, standing in the quiet of the night, letting the moment unfold naturally. The days continued to pass quietly, and the relationship between Clara and James deepened even further. As time went on, Clara felt herself becoming more and more attached to the ranch, to James, and to the sense of peace she had found there. It was unlike anything she had ever experienced before. Her life had always been filled with hard work and solitude, but now there was someone beside her who shared her life, even if just in small ways. It had been several weeks since Clara first began spending time with James, and the connection between them had grown stronger than ever. They shared meals together nearly every evening, spending hours talking and enjoying each other's company. There was no rush, no pressure to define what was happening between them. It was simply two people enjoying a growing bond, and for Clara, that was more than enough. One crisp morning after a long week of working on the ranch, Clara woke up to find the weather colder than usual. The early autumn air had a sharpness to it, and the first hint of winter seemed to be in the air. James had already risen early to tend to the cattle, as he always did, and Clara was up soon after, ready to help him with the day's work. There was something grounding about the work on the ranch that made her feel a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in a long time. She had always worked hard, but now the work seemed different. It felt less like a burden and more like something she shared with James, a part of their lives together. After a hearty breakfast of eggs and toast, Clara headed out to the barn where James was already preparing the animals for the day. He glanced up when he saw her and smiled. "Morning, Clara," he said, his voice warm and familiar. "Morning," she replied, walking over to join him.
I was thinking I could help you move the hay bales today. I'll be strong enough to do it." James raised an eyebrow but didn't argue.
"I'm sure you can," he said, his voice teasing. "But I'll be the judge of that." Clara laughed softly, glad to see him in such a playful mood. They had been working together for weeks, and she had learned much about the ranching life. But there was always something new to learn with James. He was patient and kind, explaining everything in such a calm, grounded way that Clara couldn't help but admire him even more. For the next few hours, they worked side by side, moving hay bales and checking on the animals. There was a rhythm to their movements, a silent understanding between them as they moved around the barn. They didn't need to speak much to know what the other was thinking. They worked in sync, each supporting the other in small, quiet ways. At lunchtime they took a break, sitting on the porch and enjoying the stillness of the day. Clara gazed out at the fields, watching as the wind blew gently through the tall grass. The ranch had always seemed like such a peaceful place, and now, with James beside her, it felt like home. "I've been thinking," James said suddenly, his voice low. Clara turned to look at him, her curiosity piqued. "What about?" He hesitated for a moment, as if weighing his words. "About how much I've changed since you've been here. I never realized how lonely I was until you showed up. I thought I liked being by myself, but now—" He trailed off, looking out at the horizon. Clara felt a flutter in her chest at his words. She had always felt the same way, but hearing him say it out loud made it feel more real. She had always been independent, but now she too had started to realize just how much she longed for companionship, for someone to share her life with, someone who cared. "I never thought I'd say this," Clara began softly, "but I've started to feel the same way. I've always been content with my own company, but now, I don't want to be alone anymore." James looked at her then, his expression thoughtful but soft. He reached across the table, taking her hand in his. "I don't want you to be alone either, Clara." Her heart skipped a beat at his touch. There was something about the way he held her hand, something that made her feel safe, as if everything was exactly as it was supposed to be. She had never been the type of person to openly express her emotions, but in that moment, with James's hand in hers, she felt a surge of warmth and affection that she couldn't deny. They sat in silence for a few moments, the weight of their unspoken words settling between them. The world seemed to slow down, the sounds of the ranch fading into the background as they simply held each other's gaze. There was no need for words. They both understood what the other was feeling. The days continued to pass, and the more time Clara spent with James, the more her feelings for him deepened. She had always been cautious with her heart, afraid of opening herself up to someone else, but with James, it felt natural. There was no rush, no pressure, just a quiet, steady growth of something she couldn't quite put into words. One evening after they had finished working for the day, Clara found herself alone in the barn. The last rays of the sun were casting a golden glow over the land, and she stood in the doorway taking in the view. The sky was painted in shades of orange and purple, and for the first time in a long while, Clara felt at peace. She was no longer just working to pass the time, she was living. And living was something she hadn't truly done in years. James joined her a few minutes later, and without saying a word, he stood next to her, both of them watching the sunset. "It's beautiful," Clara said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. James nodded. "It is. But it's even better when you're here with me." Clara's heart fluttered at his words. She had never felt so seen, so understood. In James, she had found not just a companion, but a partner. Someone who respected her, who valued her, and who made her feel like she mattered. And for the first time in her life, Clara realized she didn't have to face the world alone. That evening, as they sat on the porch sipping warm tea, Clara's mind wandered to the future. She had always lived day by day, focused on the present, never allowing herself to dream too far ahead. But with James, she found herself imagining a future, one where they could build something together, a life that was filled with love, companionship, and a shared sense of purpose. "I've never really thought about the future before," Clara admitted quietly. "But with you, I think I might start." James looked at her, his eyes soft and full of understanding. "I feel the same way. For the first time in a long time, I'm thinking about what comes next. And I want you to be a part of it." Clara smiled, feeling the warmth of his words seep into her heart. She had spent so many years hiding from her own feelings, afraid to let anyone in. But now, with James, she knew that opening her heart was the right thing to do. As the evening drew to a close, they sat together, letting the silence between them speak volumes. Clara had found something she never expected, someone who made her feel at home, someone who made her feel like she belonged, and for the first time in her life she felt truly happy. Clara and James's relationship had evolved into something neither of them had anticipated. What had started as two people merely passing time together had grown into something far deeper and more meaningful. Clara had never imagined that the peace and companionship she had longed for would be found in a quiet ranch house on the outskirts of town. But as the weeks passed, she realized that she had found not only a partner but a home. One crisp winter morning, Clara awoke to the sound of birds singing outside her window. The snow that had fallen overnight had covered the ground in a thick blanket of white, and the world outside was quiet, still, and beautiful. Clara could see the faint outline of James's ranch house in the distance, nestled among the rolling hills. The soft glow of dawn was just beginning to break through the trees, and for a moment Clara simply lay there, watching the scene unfold before her. She had spent a long time searching for peace and love, but now, with James beside her, she realized she had found both. The months spent with him on the ranch had changed her life in ways she couldn't have imagined. For the first time in years, she didn't feel lonely. She didn't feel like she was just passing through life. She felt rooted. She had a place in the world, and that place was beside James. As she got out of bed and began her morning routine, Clara's thoughts turned to the future. She had always been the kind of person who focused on the present, on the tasks at hand, the work that needed to be done. But now she couldn't help but think about what was to come. She and James had spent countless hours talking about their lives, their dreams, and the things they wanted to accomplish together. They had talked about building a future, one where they would share everything, both the hardships and the joys. When Clara made her way to the kitchen, she found James already there, preparing breakfast. He was as calm and collected as ever, moving effortlessly through the routine of the morning. Clara couldn't help but smile as she watched him. The sight of him, busy in the kitchen, made her heart swell with affection. "Good morning," Clara said softly, walking up behind him. James turned, giving her a warm smile. "Morning," he replied. "How did you sleep?" "Like a rock," Clara said with a laugh. "It's so quiet out there. I've never felt so peaceful." "I know the feeling," James said, his eyes twinkling. "There's something about the quiet of the ranch. It feels like the world slows down here." Clara nodded, taking a seat at the table. She loved the stillness of the ranch. It was a far cry from the busyness of the town, and it was exactly what she needed. The calm, the space, and the solitude. Everything about this place made her feel at home. As they sat down to breakfast, the conversation turned to their plans for the day. The ranch was always full of work, and while they had become used to the daily routine, Clara found herself enjoying it. It was satisfying work, the kind of work that left you feeling accomplished at the end of the day. And best of all, she had James by her side, someone who appreciated the hard work and shared in the quiet moments of life. "We should probably check on the animals later," James said as he ate. "It's been cold these past few days, and I want to make sure everything's all right." Clara nodded. "I'll help you with that. We can work together." James smiled, and Clara could see the warmth in his eyes. She had never thought that such simple moments, sharing breakfast, working side by side, would bring her so much joy. But they did. It was the small things, the quiet moments of everyday life, that made her feel so connected to James. After breakfast, they bundled up in warm clothing and made their way outside. The cold air bit at Clara's cheeks, but she didn't mind. It felt refreshing, invigorating even. The snow-covered fields stretched out before them, and the sound of their boots crunching in the snow was the only noise that broke the stillness. They spent the next few hours tending to the animals, making sure they had enough food and water to last through the cold winter months. Clara was amazed at how much she had learned in such a short time. She had always thought of ranching as hard work, but she had never realized how much attention to detail it required. It was a labor of love, and James had taught her everything she needed to know. As the day wore on, they worked together in the barn, checking on the cattle and making sure everything was secure. James was patient with her, guiding her through each task with ease, and Clara found herself growing more and more confident in her abilities. She had always been independent, but there was something different about this work. It wasn't just about doing the job, it was about doing it together. It was about building something with James, creating a life they could both be proud of. Later in the afternoon, they sat together on the porch, enjoying the warmth of the sun that had finally broken through the clouds. It was the first sign of spring, and Clara could feel the promise of new beginnings in the air. The past few months had been full of changes, and she couldn't help but think about what the future might hold for her and James. "Do you ever think about what comes next?" Clara asked, her voice quiet as she watched the clouds drift by. James looked at her, his expression thoughtful. "I think about it all the time," he said. "I think about what we can build here, what we can create together." Clara smiled, feeling her heart swell at his words. She had never been the type of person to make long-term plans, but with James it felt different. She could see a future where they worked side by side, building a life together. It wasn't just about the ranch. It was about the partnership they had formed. It was about the quiet love that had blossomed between them, the love that had grown in the stillness of their days together. "I want to be with you," Clara said softly, her heart in her throat as she spoke the words she had been thinking for so long. "I want to build that life with you." James's eyes softened, and he reached over to take her hand. "I want that too," he said, his voice steady and full of conviction. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." For a moment they sat in silence, holding hands, both of them lost in the possibilities of the future. Clara had never known love like this before. It wasn't flashy or dramatic. It wasn't a whirlwind romance. It was quiet, steady, and strong, just like the life they had built together on the ranch. As the evening drew near and the sun dipped below the horizon, Clara knew that this was where she was meant to be. She had found her place in the world, her peace, and her love. And with James by her side, she knew that the future would be full of promise. It was a future they would create together, one day at a time. With the warmth of his hand in hers, Clara felt the weight of her past fears and doubts melt away. She had found something real, something lasting. And for the first time in her life, she knew that everything would be okay. They had each other, and that was all that mattered.